It started with a fine $75 for walking his dog on a sidewalk. In front of his own house, Ethan Monroe had always been a quiet man. He didn't make waves. He worked hard, kept to himself, and took care of his dog, Murphy, an old retriever who had been with him for almost as long as he could remember. Every morning, the same routine. 6 a.m. The dog leash clicked, the door opened, and they'd stroll down the street. Just a man and his dog, as peaceful as it gets. But one morning, everything changed. He'd just turned the corner, just past Mrs. Larkin's house, when he saw the letter on his front porch wedged into the doorframe. Ethan pulled it out, not expecting much. Probably a flyer or some kind of neighborly notice about leaf raking. But when he opened it, the blood drained from his face. Notice of violation. Per the regulations set forth in Covenant 63.2, all pets must remain within private property unless designated park zones or trails are used. You have violated these terms by walking your dog on common property. Please remit payment of $75 to HOA treasurer within 10 business days to resolve this issue. He blinked, read it again, then laughed. Bitterly, of course, for walking his dog. The sidewalk in front of his house wasn't just some cracked strip of concrete. It was part of the public walk that connected to the greenbelt behind their neighborhood. Ethan walked that path daily. Murphy didn't leave the concrete, didn't venture into anyone's yard. But according to the HOA, that didn't matter. He was furious, but he wasn't stupid. He knew how this went. The HOA was ruthless. You don't get elected president by being kind and fair. Sheila Lorne, the woman who ran this neighborhood like it was her personal fiefdom, had zero tolerance for anything she couldn't control. And now, she'd decided to make an example of Ethan. It was personal, but Ethan didn't panic. Instead, he did what he always did. He took a deep breath and calculated his next move. 2 days later, he attended the monthly HOA meeting. The room was packed with neighbors, all stiff in their Sunday best. A typical HOA meeting, full of petty complaints and minor issues. Murmurs of fence colors, whether someone's lawnmower was too loud, that sort of thing. But Sheila Lorne ran the show. She sat at the head of the table, all prim and proper, with her sharp eyes scanning everyone, making sure to keep them in line. Ethan waited for his turn to speak. When it finally came, he stood, took a breath, and addressed the room. "I'm here about the fine for walking my dog on the sidewalk." The room went silent. Sheila didn't even blink. "Mr. Monroe," she said, her voice as cold as the coffee on her desk, "I suggest you read the rules. You violated Covenant 632. If you continue to disregard these regulations, further fines will be imposed." The room shifted uncomfortably. "But it's a sidewalk," Ethan replied, his tone calm but firm. "It's not on anyone's property. I've walked my dog there for years." Sheila smiled like a predator circling its prey. "I don't make the rules, Mr. Monroe. I just enforce them." A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, eyes flicking between Ethan and Sheila. Ethan knew the drill by now. This wasn't a debate. It was a show of power. But he wasn't done. "I'll pay the fine," he said, holding up the envelope. "But don't think this ends here. There's a lot more going on in this neighborhood than you're letting on." Sheila narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean? You're not just fining people for dogs. You're overstepping. You're controlling everything. The landscaping, the paint colors, the bird feeders. People are terrified to speak up because they know you'll hit them with fees. You're running this place like a mafia, Sheila. And I'm not going to sit by and let you do it to me or anyone else." There was a long, charged silence. "Good luck with that," Sheila said with a cold smile, as if Ethan were just a fleeting nuisance she could swat away. But it was clear, this was just the beginning. The moment he stepped outside, Ethan knew things were about to escalate. As he walked back toward his house, a red Jeep pulled into his driveway. It was one of Sheila's enforcers, a loudmouth named Greg, who made it his business to do her dirty work. Ethan had barely made it to the porch when Greg leaned out of the Jeep window and shouted across the yard, "Watch your back, Monroe. Sheila doesn't forget. You've made yourself a target now." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. Greg knew exactly what he meant, but it didn't matter. Ethan wasn't the kind of guy who backed down. The HOA had just made their first mistake. That night, as Ethan sat at his kitchen table staring at the fine, something clicked. This wasn't just about walking his dog. It wasn't just about a $75 fine. It was about control. And Sheila Lorne? She wasn't going to stop until she'd crushed him, and everyone else who stood in her way. But Ethan was done being controlled. He had a plan, and it wasn't going to involve begging for forgiveness. No, he was going to take the fight straight to her. It was time to flip the script. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. The fine, the taunts, the smugness of Sheila's face and Greg's threat. It all gnawed at him, relentless. He tossed and turned, fighting the impulse to just let it go, pay the fine, and forget about it. But deep down, he knew it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about power. They'd pushed him too far. By the time the sun crept through his blinds, he was wide awake, and he had a plan. The next morning, Ethan sat in his office staring at a list of property deeds he'd compiled over the past few months. Land records, tax documents, zoning codes. He had access to it all. Real estate was his job. Digging through county databases, his specialty. But this time, he wasn't just looking for a new investment. He was looking for a loophole, a weak spot in the HOA's stranglehold on the neighborhood, and he found it. Across the street from his own house, the HOA-controlled greenbelt stretched out, that patch of trees, benches, and trails that were supposed to be for the community. The HOA, Sheila in particular, had used it as a bargaining chip, doling out privileges to those who obeyed the rules. But Ethan had noticed something odd in the fine print. The land was not owned by the HOA. It had always been controlled by a defunct LLC, a relic from the original developer that had gone bankrupt years ago. The HOA had just kept managing it under the assumption that it belonged to them. Ethan had the deed. The property wasn't theirs. It was up for grabs. That day, Ethan called a few contacts. He didn't waste time. Within a few hours, he made an offer. He was buying the land. Weeks passed. The paperwork was filed. The deal was sealed. Ethan Monroe now owned the land. He stood in front of the greenbelt, gazing at the empty benches, the silent walking trail that had once been a symbol of, the HOA's power. It was surreal. The neighborhood, once a peaceful suburban paradise, now felt like a battlefield. But Ethan wasn't scared. He was calm, cold, calculated. And then the fun began. Ethan hired a contractor to install steel gates. Not the kind with rusting iron bars that anyone could climb over, but solid, impenetrable gates. The entrances to the greenbelt were blocked off. Signs went up. Private property. No trespassing, no one in or out without his permission. The HOA no longer controlled the neighborhood's walking path. It was his. And then, the emails and messages started flooding in. At first, the neighbors were confused. Then came the anger, the backlash. "How dare you lock us out of the greenbelt?" they fumed. "We've always had access to it." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't have to. Sheila did all the talking for him, and she didn't like this new reality one bit. At the next HOA meeting, Sheila made sure to bring it up. "I've heard complaints," she said, her eyes burning with disdain. "What's the deal with the gates, Monroe? This is a neighborhood, not some private estate. The HOA owns that greenbelt, and you can't just take it from us." Ethan stood calmly and faced her. "The land wasn't owned by the HOA, Sheila. The deed is in my name now. You've been violating zoning laws for years, making decisions that weren't even legally yours to make. That's the real issue. Here." He took a breath, letting the weight of the moment settle over them. "You want control? Well, I'm taking it back." Sheila's face twisted. She fought to hold her ground, but it was obvious. She was cornered. "You can't do this," she spat. "I just did," Ethan replied, his tone sharp, clear. The neighborhood split. Some residents rallied around him, realizing they'd been silently bullied for years by the HOA. Others were furious, loyal to Sheila's iron fist rule. But Ethan wasn't interested in their opinions. He wasn't trying to win anyone over. This wasn't about popularity. It was about crushing the system from within. That night, Sheila showed up at his door. Ethan had expected this. She wasn't the type to back down, but he wasn't going to apologize. "I want you to unlock those gates, Monroe. You've had your fun." "But this isn't over," she snarled. Ethan looked at her through the glass, calm, detached. "No." The room fell silent. "Do you have any idea who you're messing with?" she seethed, her voice low, dripping with venom. He didn't flinch. "Yes, I know exactly who I'm messing with. And frankly, I think you've been messing with the wrong people for two." The power was in his hands now. He didn't need to say more. The door stayed locked. Sheila turned away, the sound of her heels echoing on the pavement. The next morning, Ethan woke to a storm. A letter from the HOA arrived. But this wasn't just any notice. It was a lawsuit. They were suing him for disturbing the peace and attempting to usurp HOA authority. This, Ethan knew, was the next step. Sheila had to act fast before the entire neighborhood turned on her, and she was going for blood. That afternoon, Ethan sat in his office reading through the lawsuit. His phone buzzed. A text from his lawyer. "They don't have a legal leg to stand on, but they'll make it messy. Prepare for a long fight." Ethan smiled. Let her try. Sheila wanted to control the neighborhood, but Ethan, he wanted to own it, and he was just getting started. The lawsuit was only the beginning. Ethan knew Sheila would fight dirty. She had already proved that by using the HOA's money to fund personal vendettas. But what he hadn't anticipated was how far she'd go. She filed everything she could: complaints, temporary restraining orders, calls to the media. The neighbors were bombarded with endless letters, rallying them to her side, promising that the gates would come down and the neighborhood would return to normal. But normal wasn't what it used to be. For the first time in years, people were questioning the HOA. They were talking about the fines, the harassment, the control, and they were starting to listen to Ethan. Then came the bombshell, a tip from one of Sheila's former associates, a whistleblower, anonymous through an encrypted email. Sheila's been skimming HOA funds for years, tax records, consulting invoices. If you dig enough, you'll find that she's been laundering money through a fake landscaping business that doesn't even exist. Ethan didn't hesitate. He dove in, tracing the paper trail from the HOA's books to a series of false invoices and empty contracts. Sheila's niece's company, a so-called landscaping service, was nothing but a front to funnel HOA fees into Sheila's pockets. It was a violation of trust, and it was criminal. The next morning, the local news station called. They wanted the story. "Good afternoon, I'm Aaron Lowe, and we have breaking news out of Riverview Hills. Sheila Lorne, the president of the HOA, has been accused of embezzling HOA funds to the tune of nearly $200,000 over the past 3 years. Investigators say the money was funneled into a fake landscaping business, with invoices paid to a company that appears to be a shell operation." Ethan sat back in his chair, watching the broadcast unfold. Sheila's face appeared on screen, pale and flustered, trying to defend herself. "These are just accusations. There's no proof." But it was too late. The HOA was unraveling. Later that afternoon, Ethan sat in his living room, scrolling through his phone, watching the flood of messages come in. Neighbors who had once been loyal to Sheila were now asking for a vote of no confidence. There was talk of a town meeting, a push to dissolve the HOA altogether. But it wasn't just about the HOA anymore. Ethan had something bigger in mind. And this was the final part of his plan. He filed an official request with the county. The land where the Greenbelt sat, it wasn't just a piece of real estate anymore. It was a public park. Ethan was converting it. He was taking the Greenbelt and turning it into a dog sanctuary, a public, open-access area where anyone could come and enjoy the outdoors, walk. Their dogs have picnics, do whatever they wanted. The HOA could no longer lay claim to it. And here was the kicker. No HOA residents would be allowed access. The paperwork was filed, the permits granted. By the end of the month, the Greenbelt would be fully converted. Gates would stay locked for those who didn't belong. But for anyone else, it would be open to the public. People could come, dogs could run free, and no one would be told where they could walk or what they could do, except for Sheila. She was banned from entering. That night, Ethan took a walk, just like he did every morning, except now he was on his land. The neighborhood had changed. The gate was locked. The greenbelt was his. And when Sheila showed up the next morning, she was met with a surprise. Ethan was there, standing on the other side of the locked gates, watching her. Sheila had no idea what was coming. Her hands were shaking as she tried to unlock the gate, but the digital lock wouldn't budge. "Ethan," she called through the bars. "Let me in. I'm a resident. I have a right." Ethan stepped closer, his voice cold. "You don't own anything here anymore. You lost your right to access this land the moment you used your position to bully people." Sheila's face flushed. "You don't get it. This was never about the land, Ethan. It was about control. This whole neighborhood was supposed to be my kingdom." Ethan took a slow breath, his gaze steady. "You've lost your kingdom, Sheila, and I'm taking over." The digital lock clicked, the gate sliding open just enough for Ethan to step through. He held out his hand. "Take a walk, Sheila. You're not in charge anymore." But Sheila didn't take his hand. She turned and walked away, shoulders slumped, defeated. Ethan watched her retreat. There was no satisfaction in the moment. Just a quiet resolution. He'd made his point. He'd broken the cycle. The neighborhood, the residents, would be free to choose their own fate now. And the dog sanctuary was just the beginning. By the time the next HOA election came around, Sheila was nowhere to be found. The HOA was dissolved after a unanimous vote. Ethan didn't run for the position. He didn't need to. He'd already won. The land was his, and the power had shifted. In the months that followed, Ethan watched the community transform. The greenbelt became a sanctuary. Families gathered for picnics, dogs ran freely, and people, real people, began talking to each other instead of hiding behind bylaws and fines. Ethan wasn't a hero. He wasn't a villain. He was simply a man who'd had enough. And the story, it ended not with revenge, but with a simple truth. They say power corrupts. And sometimes, it's the people who've been abused by power who can take it back when they've had enough. So what would you do if you were pushed too far? Would you take the fight to the system, or would you walk away?